Okay, so Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young now. This is their second album, Deja Vu, March 1970 it was released. It's currently 78 on Best Ever Albums of the 70s. And we talked about their first album, Crosby, Stills and Nash, self-titled, back on in Season 1, Episode 17. So just a quick recap from where we left off. You've got Graham Nash, Stephen Stills, and David Crosby, and now Neil Young, all of other bands previously, all in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for other bands, but they became the first supergroup, and their first album was released in May of 1969, and then Neil Young joined them in July of 1969. The terms of Young's contract allowed him to still tour with his band Crazy Horse and give him some freedom in that respect. He did perform with Crosby, Stills and Nash at Woodstock and also at Altamont, although he does not appear in Woodstock, and Crosby, Stills and Nash as a whole do not even appear in Give Me Shelter, the documentary that we mentioned that ended in the 60s.
So Neil Young, he played at Woodstock, but he wasn't in the movie?
Yeah, only the three of them were, Graham Nash and Stills were in the Woodstock movie, but he was there too. So they didn't show all of their numbers in the Woodstock movie.
Okay, okay, got it. I was like, what do they just tell him, like, to put the camera away from Neil during their...
No.
Okay.
I think a lot of the bands, they all performed multiple numbers, because it was over 3 days, but
right.
They only had a couple of songs that they appeared in, and then the whole band, including Young, was not in Give Me Shelter, even though they played at Altamont as well.
Okay.
This album was released in March of 1970, but was recorded between July and January, or July of 69 through January of 1970. So, with the success of the first album, the drama starts right away, as we know. right before the start of their second tour in April of 1970, Stills fired the bass player, Greg Reeves, because he wasn't playing bass consistently. He wanted to, he was kind of too out there, or he was playing, too freely, I guess, in some way. And he also wanted to sing one of his own songs at the show, and they said, no, because your song sucks, we're not going to sing.
Was he upset that he was not the R in the group? Is that?
Yeah, maybe.
I imagine that being a big argument. Yeah.
Yeah. They were then, he was replaced by Calvin Fuzzy Samuels, who was a homeless Jamaican musician that Stills found at Island Records in the London studio.
I thought you were going to say on the street.
I mean, maybe outside of the studio.
In his sex mansion, since he was the one who owned it, to go back deep, yeah.
They also fired, they ended up firing their drummer, Dallas Taylor, who was on the first album, who frequently fought with Neil Young, and also when Young threatened to quit if they didn't fire him, because after their first show of their tour. Taylor claims he was fired because he started flirting with Young's first wife while Young was fighting with Stills over the firing of the bass player. So who knows?
Well, isn't that part of it too? Because I think that the bass player Reeves was buddies with Neil Young, and so Stills didn't. There was a power struggle between the two of them, and so Stills fired the bass player, and then Neil Young fired the drummer because the drummer was friends with Stills. It's all very third grade, kind of behavior.
Yeah. So this is after. All this stuff I'm talking about, just to get the timeline straight. This album was released March of 1970, and this all kind of, we already knew about the tensions in the band before Neil Young joined. Neil Young joining kind of exacerbated the tensions, and then all of this stuff happened after the release of the album. Much like the Stooges, they break up after this album due to all the drama that I am citing. So. Also, they, while on the second tour for this album, the Kent State shootings happened, and Young wrote Ohio very quickly as a result, and it was released as a single. They pushed the studio and themselves pushed it out as a single, while Teach Your Children was still kind of released as a single on the charts too. So Ohio was kind of separate, but important, obviously, and kind of one of their more famous songs, and also one of their higher ranking songs on the charts, and a big, like protest song for what was going on in the world, speaking to kind of our original question, or our central question about what we think of when we think of the 70s. So also, to add to the craziness, Stills was on a lot of cocaine and alcohol, abusing both at the time. At one point during the tour, he performed an extended solo set while with the band, not approved by the other band members, because he found out that Dylan was in the audience when they were in New York City. And so then I guess he just took it upon himself to, impress Dylan or something.
I'm just imagining that backstage scene with those personalities.
Yeah. The band also fired Stills at one point for 2 nights during the tour when they were in Chicago, just because of his craziness. And then the tour finally ended on July 9th, 1970. And then the band broke up almost immediately after that. They also pursued solo projects after this, to varying degrees of success. Actually, I think they were pretty all successful solo artists after this, and then they reunited for a tour in 74, which had mixed results, and then they broke up again immediately. This album stayed on the charts for 97 weeks and is currently their highest selling album of all of their careers put together, even with their solo works. It reached number 11 on the year-end charts for 1970. It had 4 singles, but only 3 charted. Woodstock was the highest at 11. Also, Teach Your Children in Our House. And then Carry On was the 4th single, but did not chart. This album was recorded at Wally Heider Studios in LA and San Francisco. That was also the studio that Creedence recorded at in San Francisco at Wally Heider, I believe. The songs, Stills had said in retrospect that getting this album made was like pulling teeth. The songs were recorded individually by each member of the group, or I guess their parts were recorded individually for each song, and then they kind of melded them together in post. So they were, and then Neil Young would often record his parts or take his parts for the songs and then take them back and edit them himself in post. And so there wasn't a lot of, despite the good harmonies on this album, they weren't really harmonizing in the studio. Also, as to add to the drama, Crosby's girlfriend, Christine Hinton, longtime girlfriend, had died during the recording of this album, and he was a mess from that as a result. She died in a car crash, actually, taking their pets to the vet, which is kind of sad. Sad. We also have some, kind of more fun facts. We've got Jerry Garcia on pedal steel guitar on Teach Your Children on this album, so that's kind of the crossover with Grateful Dead. Country Girl is a mix of 3 Buffalo Springfield songs that Neil Young kind of put together as a suite of songs. Woodstock was originally written by Joni Mitchell, who, as we've discussed, slept with seemingly every member of this band at various points, or was with them in a relationship, not just sleeping with them. But
I also always remember the story of David Crosby getting fired from the Byrds because he just randomly crashed the Buffalo Springfield show. Was it at Woodstock or somewhere? And the Byrds were just so
that
pissed
was at
that
Monterey
he just
Pop, I think.
Monterey Pop. There you go. And so
because Neil Young wasn't there, so Crosby started pplaying with Buffalo Springfield instead.
Yeah.
One of the many times that Neil Young would just leave Stephen Stills at the altar.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there's other stuff too. I mean, reading the Wikipedia page is really entertaining. I can't imagine what reading a bio about these guys is, a proper bio. But yeah, so this album really is kind of a continuation of the first album in my mind. Things happen so close together, and I wanted to add a little bit afterwards for the breakup. So John, what did you think of Deja Vu? Did you get Deja Vu listening to this album?
Well, are we talking about the CSN or are we talking about the Y? Because the songs where clearly the Y is at the forefront are very good. I mean, Ohio's not on this. I actually thought Ohio was going to be on this album. So I was kind of shocked. And that's it's funny that you mentioned that Ohio came out at the same time as Teach Your Children, because to me, Teach Your Children in Our House are the songs I think of this album, along with Carry On. But they're so schmaltzy to me, like those songs. Like, I can appreciate the harmonies in particular of those songs, but just the song Our House is just, it just seems like every commercial from a certain time period. You know what I mean? Like, it's like two cats in the yard, life use. It's like that. It's like that type of folk that I'm just like, ugh, just it doesn't do anything for me. And then like right as I get roped into that and I'm like, pretty sounds, but doesn't do anything for me, then there will be like a Neil Young song that comes out of nowhere. And it's like, here's the why that makes this a different group altogether. And so from that end of things, the stuff that's the Y parts I love. The stuff that's the CSN, like I appreciate the harmonies and the craftsmanship, but it just doesn't have any edge for me at all, and it just is there, kind of. So that's my initial hot take. I'd be happy to expand along the way. But I'm actually shocked you didn't pick Carry On, Teach the Children, or any of those songs. You went with two of the deeper cuts. And so I think if people were listening to this and listen to the montage song and where I picked Carry On, it'll sound one way, but the track you picked, Josh, will sound very different, I think. And that's an interesting part of this album.
Yeah. All right, Matt, what about you?
So I first think it's really just interesting that Neil Young's in this album at all. Like, my understanding, like
he doesn't fit really, like with them.
No, he doesn't. But especially since because he and Stills just didn't get along at all. That's why Buffalo Springfield broke up, and it wasn't like it happened 20 years ago.
And they knew that going into.
And the fact that like Stephen Stills was like, yeah, it'll be okay, right? Like I knew that I think that they were trying to find some other people they couldn't, like Steve Winwood and maybe Eric Clapton. They said no, so he's like, all right, we got to go to Neil.
Well, it's also like I'm struggling with personal issues. Why don't I bring in Neil Young and David Crosby? I'm sure that'll be pretty smooth sailing, based on test track record.
So so bringing Neil Young in here, it's that's just funny in and of itself. I really like this album. Especially the first half. I think the first side is very strong. It's interesting because I think it seems less cohesive than the first album. Mm-hmm. It definitely seems like more of individual songs written, so where the Stephen Stills songs are. I mean, the two schmaltzy songs, of course, are Graham Nash, right? There's no way Neil Young or Crosby are writing those schmaltzy songs, right?
Yeah, they're nowhere near him either. If you know,
and I totally get what you're saying, particularly with Our House. Actually, Our House, I could see McCartney doing that. That seems like a very
that's a good point. Yep, it's
song.
A very McCartney.
So it's melodic. It's fine. It's kind of it is schmaltzy. I do really like Teach Your Children, even though that's a schmaltzy song. I think that's a very pretty song. I like the steel guitar on that. Carry On's a great opener. I mean, these first two albums start with great Stephen Stills opening songs, and that takes like a little bit of a right turn, towards the end. It turns into this like goes from this folky kind of like jam out song to this like, okay, now we're gonna trip you out with a bunch of like lava lamp music and stuff. So but I think that's strong. I think all of the individual members' best songs are on side one, and then the fifth song, Woodstock, is I think that's a great version of that song. But I agree, when Neil Young comes on with Helpless, it just kills me. That just, to me, I like all those other songs, but the Neil Young song is like, this is a different level. I wouldn't say I necessarily felt that way about Country Girl. That was a very interesting song. And with both of those songs, Helpless and Country Girl, you certainly see the Neil Young laying the groundwork for what he would do later on when he did After the Gold Rush and Harvest. There's very similar sounding songs on both different ways. The folky song, and then the one that's very produced with the orchestration and the timpani and stuff.
Helpless sounds like it could be on After the Gold Rush or Harvest.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. I think both of these songs could, because he was doing both of these sounds on those albums. But I love Neil Young's voice when he comes in. I'm just not like I was, hating on any of the other guys, but when he comes in and he just sings, I'm like, oh, that's so. I love Neil Young, and I'm excited to cover more of his solo stuff later on. But I think Crosby's Almost Cut My Hair is a great song.
I really like that song.
I liked all that. Deja Vu is okay. I think 4 and 20 is a pretty song for the Stills song.
Did you laugh as hard as I did that there's a song called 4 plus 20 on it? That made me
Yeah,
yes.
it's like, well, that was probably the light drugs that they were probably partaking in. So yeah, and I can just see this album almost seems to me like what they were doing in the studio was probably very similar to what the Beatles were experiencing doing the White Album. Just everybody hating each other and like doing their own thing and like being really resentful and stuff. And actually, Josh, I think I did see something that Graham Nash, for when he did Our House, when he was approached to license that, he was trying to get everybody else to like agree to it, and Neil Young was like, I don't want you doing that, I don't want my name associated. He's like, well, screw you, because I don't think Neil Young played on that. I think Neil Young like
no, that's what I'm saying.
Whatever.
There's nothing like with that you could even tell that he's in the bit. It sounds like the old stuff.
Yeah, and that's and so like Graham Nash did it anyways. Like, screw you, I'm gonna cash a check here. But yeah, some of that stuff you hear, like Helpless is just Neil Young, 4 and 20 is just Stills.
It's
pretty
just
much,
Stills. Yep.
So the CSN even isn't always there, as a group either. But
right.
But overall, I really did like this. And they're still. I still look at these guys as like the quintessential, like, 60s hippie baby boomer band. Like, this is just that folk, that folk, they had all the messages. This is a band that's they're very political, and they have all these messages about peace and love, and like, and they're just, it gets very heavy handed. And this is one of those bands that my parents loved, that they just champion, is like, this is when music was music. I can see them getting like that snobby, and I get it. But at the same time, it's like, all right, slow your roll. There's other great stuff out there too. Yeah. But I do like these guys a lot.
Well,
so
they're like essential boomer, right? Like, when I think they and Simon and Garfunkel, and like I also think you'll laugh at this, I think, man. I think of them as like the earlier lineage for a band I really like a lot, but who got a lot of the same thing. They're like the earlier stage of like their boomer group, in the same way that like 10,000 Maniacs was like Gen X, cause-driven group, you know what I mean? Or maybe REM, where they're writing about weighty things, you know what I mean? And you love them if you're in the era, but maybe they don't travel as well out of it. So yeah.
Josh,
I really like this album. Also, it is interesting because adding Neil Young is like a major upgrade, in my opinion. You can feel his impact right away. I love his guitar when he comes in with guitars on different parts of the song, right in the first song, and then even in the last song, it's just like this hard rock guitar that wasn't present in the first album. But on the other hand, you can see like the fracturing of the band in this album the more we talk about it. Like, just the fact that everybody's song is different. There's less harmonizing on this album as a whole. It's like they couldn't even stand to harmonize with each other in songs. So in the first album, you have all these like kind of lush harmonies on all of the songs. You only have it in songs here and there on this album.
Yeah, there's no Helplessly Hoping on this album, right? No. Which was just straight up that.
So if you like that in your Crosby, Stills and Nash, you're not going to get that as much. But I mean, this album was clearly popular and is their best-selling album for a reason. At times, I feel like, with less harmonizing, it's like they're almost taking a back seat to Neil Young on this album, although it doesn't seem to be the case. They kind of all did their own thing and stitched it together after the fact. I like, do you think of this version of Our House or the Madness version of Our House when you hear that song?
Well, I think of them separately, because they're different songs. They share one set of lyrics, but not, you know what I mean? Like, outside of that one lyric, the rest of it's totally different.
I think I normally go to this when I think of Our House, but that's
I go to both equally, but for different reasons.
See, I think I might have heard the Madness version first, and so it kind of threw me off because I forgot that this was originally their song. So when I heard it, I was like, oh, it's like the Madness.
Yeah, but it isn't a cover. It isn't for those that know the Madness, it isn't a cover. Yeah.
I think it's because of the commercial. I remember the Graham Nash song being in commercials. So as a kid,
I also Graham Nash, like, I don't know if there's another band where the multiple people sing and the person whose voice I like the most has the songs I hate the most, and that's how I feel about Graham. You know what I mean? Like, he has a beautiful voice that sings songs I tend to really hate, and that's how I felt about this out. To me, like, there's a clear hierarchy on this. It's like Neil Young, Stephen Stills, David Crosby, and then draw a long arrow down Graham Nash. And that's the hierarchy, hard hierarchy.
And the other thing too is Graham Nash was probably the nicest guy. He probably would have been the easiest to get along with.
And my dad's favorite of them. Neil Young's close, but like he loves Graham Nash.
Oh, really?
So I apologize, Dad. I know you love him, but
I don't think I've heard solo Graham Nash stuff, so I guess it probably sounds like this, but
it sounds like his songs on this, like very pretty English.
Well, that's what he did with the Hollies too, right? The Hollies in Buffalo Springfield were very different, so very very clean. Yeah.
Yes, and that's his solo albums. Yeah, and he's British, so that's the other thing. Yep. British sensibility. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Matt. I think the first side of this is stronger because I mean those are like five solid hits right there on that album. It's pretty unimpeachable actually. And then there's some things I like. I like Our House, and I like 4 and 20. I think that's a nice solo song. And I just kind of like the rock sensibility of that Neil Young adds to Everybody I Love You. So even the back half is enjoyable. It's just not as like hit after hit as the first half. And so it's great. That's pretty much all I had to say about it. Can I make
a description here because it's like I enjoy this album, but I feel about this album like I felt like a lot of the albums in the 60s. This occupies a specific place, and I know there's going to be people of a certain age that are going to hate me for saying this, but this does not transcend the era that it's in my opinion. Okay. It very much speaks to a time and a place that by the time the late 70s came in, that was what the late 70s wiped off. And I think that's why this is when music was what it was about this group, because the late 70s was very much a reaction to stuff like this. It's like, we're going to sing about causes, but we're not going to sing like, teach your children well. We're going to be like, the world kind of sucks. For people like us, we're inheriting a different, ethic, as a result, I almost feel like this type of music very much gets like, it is very much of 1970, and actually even more so the late, like Matt, you mentioned that you thought this band was a late 60s band, but this was 70, right? And CSNY didn't even exist in the 60s, and so like only CSN did, right? So that's that's what I would argue, is that this doesn't travel for me. Like,
no, this is very much a 60s album.
Yeah, I mean, they recorded it in the 60s.
Well, the sound is when you hear this, I mean, when we talk about when did the 70s start, it didn't start here.
Right.
No.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and it's also like, do you feel like this sound when we get to like the later 70s and the 80s and the 90s, like I think a lot of people loved listening to it, but I go back once again, like who are the sons and daughters of this type of music? Or did it really just, by the time the late 70s came, Neil Young himself, you can see a lot of what was spawned from him, but, does CSNY carry outside of the time in a big way?
Let's look. I mean, folk and, Americana music has never really, it's still out there. It's not like it's totally gone. I think one of the things that's probably lost, right, is the production, of this type of sound, which is definitely very, kind of, grounded in the 60s. I think that these guys were huge hits. I mean, this was a huge band, and when they reformed later on and played in the 80s and stuff, they were selling out. I mean, I saw them back in, the early 2000s, and people were losing their minds,
Yeah, so, but they were playing their shit.
Right,
that was from 1970.
Right, and I agree. That I don't know if people are doing that same genre to the level that they were. I think people are still doing the music. I think the production's different, and I think that the popularity has definitely waned.
I think it stood out to me because we so clearly can see like the evolutionary nature of the Stooges and the Grateful Dead. Like they just continued to influence bands for decades and decades after, and I think Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, this album is the most well-regarded, and I understand why, but I also think it's by far the least influential.
Yeah,
Hot take.
I think that's a valid point.
I might need to think more about that, but I'm not going to totally come out and disagree with it. But I think that there's definitely that feeling though that these were these freaking people love these guys, man. And I remember even in high school, I remember like, you know, kids like let's go see Crosby, Stills and Nash. And I was like, like it took me a while to get on that train. But you know,
you had kids in your high school wanting to go see Crosby. Even the hippies near me weren't necessarily saying, "Hey, let's go see CSNY."
Yeah, I remember a friend going up to another friend, like she was all excited. She's like to my buddy John, like, "Let's go. We're gonna see Crosby, Stills and Nash." And I'm like, "You're gonna go see what?" Like,
wow.
I wasn't feeling that at the time, but I mean, this was one conversation I heard. You know, it wasn't like it was this overarching thing, but I think, and this is the type of thing that the Stooges were, you know, like, man, I'm sick of this stuff, you know, this, and it's a very,
which isn't totally fair because this is really well done versions of that type of music, you know. So sure. I do want to say that, like, it's a very enjoyable album. It's what was reacted to, but there's a lot of tripe that's worse. You know what I mean? But
don't we need this stuff though? I mean, don't you need, like, you know, certain movements or bands or genres or whatever, and then don't you the reactions to them start new genres and stuff like that? So even though they're totally, I mean, it's all part of the thing, right? So they're influential maybe in some ways, and they're influential in totally different ways, like the backlash, right? And I think that we kind of lose sight of that sometimes, and that's, you know, it's looked at as a negative, but it's also really positive for the different direction that people want to take music. So I think it's important for that as well.
Yeah, that's a good point, Matt.
Absolutely.
So yeah, another the beginning of the end of the Crosby, Stills and Nash for us.
So this was ranked number 78 in the 80s or the 70s, sorry, and 15 in 1970 and 307 overall. So this is one of the more, I think the Stooges album, I think, was the highest ranked. That was like 48 or something. So I think that was the highest ranked album that we covered today.
Okay.
That surprises me. I would have thought the CSNY one was.
Yeah.
So